Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Let me see if I can, I'd like for that to go away. But regardless, good morning. It's a beautiful day here on campus. I'm happy to be here. Happy to present here for the East Texas Fruit and Vegetable Conference in 2021. We're going to talk small fruit production for the homeowner, for the backyard. Unfortunately, we have about an hour, and we couldn't go through everything that you need to know about fruit production. We couldn't go through that if we spent 8 hours on here today. So unfortunately, I can't tell you everything, but I'm going to give you the pointers, the things that I've learned from experience, and just some helpful things as we explore what we can grow as far as fruit, perennial fruits in the East Texas region. And we all get excited, and I'm guilty of this too. I get excited about fruit trees, and I, look at the fall catalogs or the nursery websites, and they have beautiful pictures of fruit trees and what we can grow in fruit trees. And doesn't always work out the way that we see it in the pictures, the way we see it online. A lot of times it's romanticized online, this idea of fruit production. We're going to throw a tree in the backyard, and in a couple of years we're just going to be overrun with fruit. And a lot of times we have something like this. We have less than desirable results. We have a failure to thrive, failure for vigorous growth. And part of what I want to do today is give you some ideas, some things that I've learned to help avoid these kind of situations where we have less than desirable establishment and growth of our fruiting plants. Now this is in the way. I wish, I don't know why I can't get that to go away, but the title here of the slide says, "So what's a fruit enthusiast to do?" And my opinion, my educated and experienced opinion is I've gone more towards, if you're struggling to, everybody wants to grow peach trees. And I do too. And I have 7 or 8 of them at home, and they've been in the ground 5 years now. And I had 1 year of a good harvest on most of those trees. And I'm a horticulturist. So if I'm struggling to have success with something like peaches, I've started to accept for myself that, well, I really like fruit and I like fruit production. So let's grow things that need maybe a little less constant maintenance and care, something like indigenous or native fruits, what I like to call feasible fruits, things that are just a little bit easier to grow. But if we do want to grow the little more complicated fruits, the peaches, the plums, pecans, we can do that, and you can do that. But in order to do that, you have to develop what I have here. You have to develop an intimate understanding of the species that you're growing, of your planting site, the soil, the water, the sunlight, the pests. And to manage those pests, you really need to understand their biology, their behavior. And furthermore, we need to have a good chance of success, we need to select varieties and rootstocks that have superior genetics. That's going to give us a leg up. And then the final piece is to combine all of that understanding in order to provide superior management and conditions. So it can be done, those more difficult fruits, the peaches, the stone fruit, the pecans, but you really have to have this intimate understanding. And so here's again, I can't get this to go away. But here's a list of our native or indigenous type fruits. Of course, a lot of folks are familiar with dewberry. Up here on the top left, dewberry is a progenitor of blackberry, the blackberry that we know from the store. You well know dewberries grow wild. They don't, in the wild, nobody's fertilizing, nobody's watering, nobody's controlling pests, and yet folks go out every year and harvest dewberries. So the same for a lot of these. We have a native persimmon, Diospyros virginiana, the American or common persimmon, grows all over East Texas. Again, very little care required. Then, of course, pecans are native. That we have grapes and muscadines that are native. They're not maybe the Champanelle or the fancy wine grapes that are grown out west or in California, but again, they require very little care and maintenance, and they offer a reward of getting that fruit. We do have some native prunus species, those plums, Mexican plums, flatwood plums, of course, walnuts. The black walnut is edible, just a lot of work to get it open. Prickly pear, maybe not as common for you folks in East Texas, although I've seen some prickly pear in East Texas. Again, everything but the root of prickly pear is edible. Farkleberry, we don't see as much anymore. It's a cousin to the blueberry, but it is, again, a native of East Texas. And so that's something that could be cultivated. Passion fruit, a lot of people actually, before they understand and realize what a passion fruit is, they think it's a weed. Well, if you let it grow, it has a beautiful flower and it actually has edible fruit. Pawpaw is gaining some more acceptance and more recognition in the fruit growing world. Pawpaw is a native fruit to the southeastern U.S. It's kind of a custard tasting fruit. It's sort of looks like the shape of a mango. Pawpaw is gaining some popularity, although I found it's a bit tricky to grow. Still kind of learning how to grow that. Mulberries are wild and native here, grow all over. They're a little bit small. The fruit is fairly small, but again, very little or no care, and we have a rewarding fruit harvest. Agarita or wild currant there on the bottom, again, that's more of a western species, makes a little fruit that can be used. It can be used as an ornamental plant, but I don't know how well it would do in East Texas with the rains that we tend to get. Here's just an example. Prickly pear. If you have friends in the west or southwest part of even the central part of Texas, they have lots of stands and just hundreds and hundreds of fruit. Prickly pear tuna. They can be harvested and made into jellies or wines or syrups. And also, as I said, the pads are edible. Here's a picture from my grocery store of nopalitos, cactus pads that are despined and then cooked and are cooked in eggs and other dishes. And they're wonderful edible species. There's even guides online. Here's an example from New Mexico State University. They have a whole page here about how to make jelly from the fruit, how to make pink lemonade from the fruit, how to utilize pads. And so there's resources out there to help you utilize some of these easy growing fruits, these feasible fruits. And I really wish this would go away because it's covering up my slide.
It's not covering it on our end, Stephen.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
I see American Beautyberry. Yeah, I see it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So just another example, American Beautyberry, a native of East Texas. Hopefully all of you have seen this. Again, I got tired of struggling with my peaches and other things at home. So I just dug up some American Beautyberry from a wild place, brought them to my house. I planted them, watered them a little bit to get them established, and then I have not touched them since. And it's been 2 or 3 years. This year I had a wonderful harvest. I got about a half a gallon of berries there that you see in the pot off of one plant that had literally no care, no fertilizer, no water, no weed control. Harvested the fruit, boiled it down. I tried to make jelly. Obviously, I didn't add enough pectin and it ended up looking more like syrup, but it had a beautiful red rosy color, sort of a rose petal flavor to it. It's a different flavor, but again, it was great on pancakes. And again, I didn't have to do anything to make this thing provide me with a reward, to get a reward of the fruit. So consider some of these more native, indigenous, low input fruits. Otherwise, let's talk about some of our more common cultivated plants. Here's your recipe for success in my mind. Site selection and evaluation. These are kind of the principles. Species selection and variety selection. Proper planting and establishment. If we don't get off on the right foot, we're going to struggle for the life of that plant. It's really hard to recover. There's no special fertilizer. There's no special spray that's going to make up for not doing one of these things completely. There's no fertilizer that's going to make up for selecting the wrong species, the wrong variety for for your area. So these things I think are critical for success. And I like to I like to throw this slide in here when I'm teaching folks. Like I said before, I can't tell you everything that you need to do to grow every type of fruit today, but I can try to teach you some of the principles. And so Harrington Emerson said, as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods, but the man who tries methods, ignoring principles, is sure to have trouble. And I see this with almost everybody these days that comes to me for help on fruit trees. Is they're online, they're seeing the romantic pictures and articles on growing fruits, but we don't grasp the principles. And then when we have a problem or a struggle, we look online for a method to use and we say, oh, I'm going to select that method and try it. But you are, in that case, the man trying methods, ignoring principles. And I, as an educator here, I would like to give you some ideas of the principles to apply so that you have that basic understanding to then go out and select your own methods. So it really all starts with soil evaluation, and we could go through these things in detail, but this is what I've learned from talking to a lot of you folks, and I think you're all in East Texas, and I think most of you have sand. Right? You've got sandy soils, East Texas. I looked at some soil maps getting ready for this, and I think the majority of you are going to have sand or a sandy loam or a loamy sand soil. But I hear this everywhere I go. Almost everybody says, I have the most terrible soil. I have the worst clay soil. And this is often my reaction. Because your soil, often when they tell me that their soil is great, it's a loamy, it's a sandy loam soil, it's a wonderful soil. I would encourage you to go get your hands in the soil. This picture here on the right shows how you can kind of do a texture feel test to understand, is it really a heavy clay soil? So you get a little ball of soil, you wet it down a little bit, just until that ball glistens with moisture, doesn't need to be sopping wet. And then you try to squeeze that soil between your thumb and forefinger, forming a ribbon. And if it makes a long ribbon, 2, 3, 4 inches long, then you have heavy clay. But I have soil like you guys, I think, and it's going to fall apart as you try to make that ribbon. You have a sandier soil, and that's a wonderful soil to grow in. I found that a sandier soil is a little bit more forgiving in some aspects. So there's, again, some examples of long ribbons. The picture on the right is soil from my house, and I think probably a lot of you have soil similar to this. And you see the 0, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot depths, and your depths will vary. But I would encourage you to go out and dig a hole. Figure out, what is your depth of soil? Do you have a foot of soil and then a heavy clay or a rock layer, or iron ore layer? I think a lot of you have iron ore. Or do you have a nice deep 3 foot soil? What you're seeing on the right here, from about 0 to 2 feet, is a sandy loam, very, very nice soil. What you're seeing there below 2 feet, where it turns red and gray, that is a sandy clay layer. So the problem that this presents, the main problem here with this type of soil profile, is that water infiltrates through those top layers very quickly, but when it hits that red clay layer below, it does not infiltrate quickly through that layer, and it wants to perch on top of that. And as you get more rain and more rain, it's eventually going to saturate that topsoil that you have. And when that soil becomes saturated and the water perches on top of that sandy clay layer below, then we have problems with fruit trees, with anything, vegetables, shade trees, ornamentals. That's, roots have to have oxygen. We always think that plants need carbon dioxide, but roots have to have oxygen. And when they sit in this saturated soil for extended periods, that's when we develop a lot of issues. So again, this is a principle to understand so that you can select a method later on to overcome or mitigate this issue. Some of you should be aware of fill dirt. If you're living in a sort of development, I think this is maybe more common down in my area and in the flatlands, the coastal areas of the state where we're more flat and have a problem with drainage. A lot of new neighborhoods and developments, they bring in soil. and they build up the area to build your house on so it doesn't flood. And sometimes that soil is decent for growing, and sometimes that soil is very poor for growing plants. And so again, do some investigation, dig a hole, see what kind of soil you've got. Take soil samples to see what's the pH of that soil. Is it somewhere in the range that's suitable for growing fruit trees? Probably none of you should have salinity issues. Since you're in East Texas, you get plenty of rain, so I wouldn't worry too much about salinity, but take a soil sample, submit it to our soil testing lab. When you get the results, if you don't know what they mean, come back to us, email them to me, email them to your county agent, and get some help with interpreting those soil test results. This is a big one. We need good water drainage through the soil. So here's an easy test. And I said already, dig a hole several times. Well, here's your chance. Dig a hole about 8-10 inches wide, about 32 inches deep. Not only are you going to see what kind of soil comes out of that and get a better understanding of the depth of your soil, but then fill that hole with water. And you want to do this not when we're in a drought, not right after heavy rains, sometime when the soil is just an average moisture. You fill that hole with water. If it drains within 8 hours, you've got excellent internal drainage. 8 to 24 hours, that's pretty good. Over about 48 hours, 24 to 48, that's going to cause some headache and some problems for you. If it's more than 2 days and that hole's not drained, that's an unacceptable soil to grow fruit trees. You're going to have to do something to overcome that issue. Because as I said before, overwatering or excess water, saturation of soils for extended periods is a major killer of fruit trees. This is an example of root rot. You see the root here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is sort of healthier looking tissue. It should be white, but this is root rot, often Phytophthora root rot, where this root is brown and dying. And that's often caused by overwatering or excess soil moisture.
We see your mouse, Stephen.
Terrific, thank you. The next thing to consider is sunlight. I see this all too often as well. I go to a homeowner's, I go to some property and they've got some fruit trees planted and it's in a convenient place for them, which is good. You need to plant your trees where they're convenient so that you can get water to them. You can check on them regularly, but they're planted in half shade. And then they wonder why the canopy is thin, the tree is not producing to its full potential. So here's an example, an aerial shot of my property. This is my little 1 acre homestead. And so obviously I've got fruit trees in it, but where do you think I planted the fruit trees? You know, I love the live oaks that we have on the property, but I don't have a whole lot of sunlight left. And in fact, I'm trying to convince the wife to let me cut down some oak trees so that I can plant more fruit trees. But look where they ended up, in those sunny areas on the northern side of the property where they're going to receive more sunlight. The stars are more peaches and citrus and different things. The red circles are blackberries that I have planted. So again, sunlight, very important. Most of our fruiting plants need 6 to 8 hours of full direct sun to really maximize their production. They can survive with less, but to reach their potential, we need 6 to 8 hours. Okay, we talked internal soil drainage, but you also need to understand surface drainage. During a rainstorm is a wonderful time to go out and evaluate your property. Put on a raincoat and some rubber boots and get out there and look around. Where is the water puddling? Where do you have low spots that aren't obvious when things are dry, so that you know either I need to avoid that low-lying area or I need to come up with some mitigation effort like containers or raised beds or at least some type of berm. Again, this is to improve surface drainage to avoid that saturation problem. Also, a lot of our larger perennial species, peach trees, persimmons, pecans especially, the larger the tree, the more soil depth is preferred. We like to say at least 3 feet is preferred. Now, remember that picture of my own soil back home? It was about 2 feet deep. So I don't have the 3 feet that we recommend that you have. So you can still grow some things there, but they probably need to be planted up in a raised bed, up on a berm. And so that not only is that a drainage mitigation, but that also gives you some extra rooting depth as well. Okay, let's talk some fruits. We like to divide them into kind of low, medium, and high input categories. And there could be some arguments made that some of these can move. Like pecans, we have in high input. But, you know, I kind of argue too that they could be low input. If you have native pecan trees on the back of the property, you could still, I mean, there's lots of people that provide no input to those native pecans. And, you know, once in a while, they make a good crop. They're not going to maximize production every single year without inputs. But as a low input, well, they can give you a reward sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and mark out olives. We talked about this as the meeting was, as people were coming in, and North Texas is probably too far north for olives. Even here in College Station, it's really too cold for olives. And with that, you could also probably mark out citrus as well. Persimmons, I love persimmons. Growing more and more all the time. So I talked about the native Texas persimmon. The Native American persimmon. So there's also Asian persimmons. The Native American persimmon is often very smaller fruit, about the size of a quarter, smaller than a golf ball. The Asian persimmons are a bit bigger, baseball sized, sort of. You can kind of see there what they look like. Very few problems. Sometimes a little bit of fruit drop, which we think is probably more just the tree's sensitivity to soil moisture. Sometimes they can get sunburn. Often the biggest problem is varmints. The raccoons or other varmints want to get in there and take the fruit. They can be very productive trees, as you see there on the bottom right hand picture. They can be very productive and rewarding. You do need to pay attention to the pollination requirements. Some varieties do require a pollinizer variety nearby so that they cross and actually set fruit. And there's tons of persimmon varieties out there. We have not tested all of them, but we do know some that do work well in Texas. Fuyu is the most common. It's a self-fruitful variety, and it's also non-astringent. And if you've ever tasted an astringent persimmon, you won't forget it. It's very chalky, very bitter. You've got to let those things ripen fully. They need a decent amount of space, at least 12, 15 feet. And they're often grafted onto that Diospyros virginiana rootstock, that Native American persimmon rootstock. So again, well adapted to East Texas conditions. I talked about the astringency. There are some people that claim the astringency goes away after the first freeze, and that's just not true. It's just a matter of length of ripening period. They can certainly ripen before a freeze. In fact, I had one this past weekend that was ripe, fell from the tree 1st of October, and it was ripe, not astringent anymore, an American native persimmon. The fruit drop complex problem, as I said, probably mulch heavily, provide ideal moisture conditions, and that's going to minimize the fruit drop problem. Jujubes. I'm seeing more interest in jujubes these days as we go along. I like this quote from Dr. McKitchen here in Texas A&M. He says, "Climate for jujubes should be hot and dry. Jujubes have survived drought and excess moisture better than any other fruit plant in trials at College Station." Wow. That sounds like a low input fruit, right? And so here's a picture on the right, some trees that I found driving around where I live. These were out in a cattle pasture, far from a house, no irrigation, no inputs at all. And there's those trees, and look at the fruit on them. Now, the fruit wasn't wonderful quality because they weren't being watered, but it was loaded with fruits. They're widely adapted to different soil types, very hardy trees. They can get to be sort of big, 15, 50 feet tall. They're a later ripening fruit, so July to September. A lot of people complain that the fruit is sort of spongy. It's kind of like an apple, but some people claim it's sort of spongy and dry. But our experience has shown that if the tree is well watered, has good moisture, that fruit tends to be more crispy and juicy, more like an apple. I think a lot of times folks think, well, this is a hardy tree, it's drought tolerant, I'm not going to water it heavily because it's drought tolerant. Well, then they end up with a more dry kind of fruit eating experience. So keep them well watered, but they can survive extremes in cold, extremes in hot. The only problem, if it's a tall tree, getting the fruit off the tree, that's a sort of a minor inconvenience. Root sprouting, they do tend to want to sucker and send up root suckers throughout the yard. So be aware of that. That's probably not one that you want right in the front yard, but maybe somewhere towards the back in an unused portion. And some of the varieties are quite thorny. But again, we just have some trade-offs in life, right? There's hundreds, maybe thousands of varieties. Honey jar and sugar cane seem to be some of the more desirable. Folks have a better eating experience with honey jar, sugar cane. Chico, as you see on the bottom there, produces a nice big fruit, and so there's tons of varieties to try. Lee, the variety you see on top left there, Lee, and the bottom one, Lang or Long. Lee and Long are probably the most common jujube varieties that you'll see for sale, and they're good, but there's probably more desirable varieties out there, such as honey jar or sugar cane. Some of the varieties are best left on the tree and just let those fruit dry on the tree. They're kind of eaten as a chewy dried candy, and it kind of concentrates the sugar in the fruit. And some are best eaten fresh when they're still crispy and sort of the green and transitioning to green brown. So a very versatile fruit that needs more attention. I think they can be very productive. They can produce fruit the second year after planting. Again, highly productive and just a good, rewarding fruit growing experience. Okay, pomegranates. We talked a little bit before the meeting got started, and pomegranates are a little cold sensitive. Some of you folks in the more northern reaches of East Texas might have some troubles with pomegranates. They can vary in height. There's different varieties. There's different ways to utilize the fruit. Again, as I talked about, the major limitation is the low temperature tolerance. These are some of the more varieties listed here. These are some of the more some of the varieties that have done a little bit better in some of our trials across Texas. But again, those are going to vary in their cold hardiness. So I actually don't have any data to share with you on what's the most cold hardy. Some of these Russian varieties like Salavatsky, Russian 18, Kazaki, I think those are going to be more cold hardy, having that Russian lineage. The big problem with pomegranates, as you see in the middle picture and the bottom picture, the middle is sunburn. The bottom picture is alternaria, heart rot. That may also be caused by leaf-footed bugs. You see those on the top right picture, leaf-footed bugs or stink bugs. They pierce the fruit. Perhaps we think maybe they introduce a disease that rots the fruit, but we're working on that. And to be honest, we don't have it figured out yet. We've done some work trying to reduce sunburn with some different spray applications, and we really haven't cured it yet. Here's an Austin pomegranate. I think a seedling selected in Austin, Texas. Very beautiful color. But as you can see, the skin or the rind of the fruit is not always perfect, but the inside can be good. Here's what Alabama is trying to help reduce some of that sunburn, just covering the rows with shade cloth. That can be somewhat successful to keep the bugs off. Of course, we can use insecticides fairly effectively to control stink bugs. But if don't want to, or if you just have a tree or two and you want to protect those individual fruits, there are fruit protection bags that can be put on to protect those individual fruits from sunburn as well as from insects. Grapes, I would like to put them more in a medium input category, but they do have some major limitations. Pierce's disease is the main one. And I'm not a grape expert, I'll tell you that. We do have viticulturists here that are dedicated grape experts. Frost and freeze injury can be a problem. But here's Pierce's disease. It's transmitted by this little insect on the bottom there. And it's very, very difficult to control. So we rely on growing types of grapes that are tolerant or resistant to Pierce's disease. Hopefully, probably a lot of you are familiar with Mustang grapes, the wild grape, or there's also a wild muscadine that grows in East Texas. They can be utilized in home landscapes. And again, without hardly any inputs, we can have a rewarding fruit harvest from those. Here's some variety recommendations for grapes for East Texas, at least, that are resistant to Pierce's disease. The two that I see most common are Blanc du Bois and Black Spanish. Those are pretty decent wine grapes for East Texas. I want to draw your attention to the table grape, the Victoria Red. It's sort of a newer variety, but it grows very well in East Texas. It came to us from Arkansas. The only kind of downside to Victoria Red is it does have a couple of seeds in each grape, but otherwise a beautiful grape. And I'm going to talk about razzmatazz a little bit as well. Here's Victoria Red. It's a Texas superstar plant. You can see the cluster is a little more loose, so it doesn't have the rotting problems that we have typically in wine grapes, but beautiful red color. They can make long clusters. In fact, I believe in Dallas, AgriLife or Master Gardener, somebody has a project going on growing these organically without any commercial pesticide sprays. So they can be grown. Obviously, they do need protection from varmints and birds. So you see the bird netting in that middle picture. But Victoria Red, look into it and give it a shot. Razzmatazz is gaining some popularity. It's a neat little plant to grow, especially for the backyard. It has a long fruiting period, as you see there, from July to the first frost here in College Station. The grapes themselves are sort of small. The clusters are sort of small, but again, a rewarding experience with low inputs. So you could look into razzmatazz as well. Muscadines are gaining popularity. I don't know a lot about muscadine, but I wanted to let you know that's an opportunity as well. There's hundreds of varieties. We do have some now that are starting to get seedless. So there's that going on. But personally, I don't enjoy all that much the flavor of muscadines, but there's a lot of folks that do. High sugar content. They tend to escape some of the freezing and frost problems that we have. So muscadines could be grown, but they need trellising and training, just like a grape would. If you're in this area of Nacogdoches, Stephen F. Austin University, Dr. Creech has a wonderful variety trial. In fact, as you see his post there, I guess it's a month old on Facebook. Go ahead and follow Stephen F. Austin SFA Gardens if you're on Facebook and see what Dr. Creech is doing. But he's got a wonderful variety trial, and he actually invited folks out to come and pick those different varieties and get to experience and taste them themselves. So take a look at that if you're interested in muscadine. Okay, moving to some of the medium input blueberries. I'll be honest with you folks, I don't have a lot of experience in blueberries. Where I'm at, my soil is not quite acidic enough. The pH is not quite low enough for blueberries, and I just haven't gone through the trouble of growing them in containers. But blueberries could be a wonderful option for you folks in East Texas. There are some major limitations, of course. As I said, they have to have a very low or rather low soil pH, at least below 5.5. They really prefer something between 4 and 5. Again, have a soil test done and see what the pH of your soil is if you're not sure. If your pH is above 5.5, I'm kind of sorry to tell you, but you're not going to feasibly be able to lower that pH. We can take a low pH soil and raise it by adding limestone, but it's almost impossible to take a neutral or high pH soil and lower it to where blueberries need to grow. So if your native soil is not a low enough pH, not at least 5.5, then I would really recommend growing these in some type of container. Biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems, is maybe spring frost. They tend to flower early and can be caught by a late frost. So that's a challenge. Again, if they're in a container, you could bring them inside maybe and protect them from that spring frost. Of course, birds love the fruit. The blueberry fruit tend to be right on top of the bush, just presenting themselves to the birds. So that can be an issue. But there's ways, of course, to mitigate around that. High rainfall, sometimes as the fruit develops and as it reaches maturity, high rainfall can rot the fruit. Most varieties do need a pollinizer variety nearby so that they can cross and you have a good fruit set. So you have to be paying attention to that. Some of these other fruits that I've talked about, if I didn't mention the need for pollinizers, then they are self-fruitful. They don't need another variety nearby to pollinize. It's sort of a medium-sized bush, so the spacing can be a little bit closer. They do best in full sun. I visited people before that say, well, my blueberry just isn't thriving. I have to give it afternoon shade. And that might be necessary as the plant is getting established in the spring to protect it from the afternoon sun. But once it's established, that plant should be able to thrive in full day, 8 hours of direct sun. And if it's not, there's something else going on. There's a root problem, there's a soil problem. There's some other issue that needs to be addressed. Mulch, mulch, mulch. They're fairly shallow rooted plants. So we really recommend generously applying mulch to these and really to all of these fruit trees, but blueberries especially need lots of mulch. Here we have a list of acceptable varieties. You need to pay attention mostly to the chill hours. So some of you folks in far northeast Texas, you're going to be around that 800 chill hour range. Below about Dallas, you get to about a 600, 650 hours. You can do an internet search. Texas A&M has some maps on where the different chill zones lie throughout Texas, so you get an understanding. So pick your varieties based on chill hours, and then make sure you have some complementary pollinizer varieties. As I said, they can be grown in containers. They really do best with a slow release fertilizer. You could use compost for that to satisfy the nutritional needs of the plant. Otherwise, a good slow release, high nitrogen fertilizer is best. And we don't want to use soil in pots. Soil doesn't drain like it should in a pot. We have to use a soil-less media, typically a mixture of perlite, vermiculite, or pine bark or pine needles, or composted pine bark works very well. I would try to stay away from 100% peat moss as your potting media. Peat moss tends to kind of decompose and get kind of compressed, and then it doesn't want to drain well. So I would look at more of the pine bark, decomposed pine bark, maybe some vermiculite in there. No gravel. This is a rule for all containers. There's no need, and in fact, science proves that putting stones or gravel in the bottom of your pots actually does not improve drainage. In fact, it makes the drainage and the root rot problem worse. So no gravel, no stones in the bottom of the container. And again, mulch heavily. Blueberries are another, this is the reason that they are medium inputs, is that they're sensitive to water quality. If you were here in College Station, you absolutely could not water blueberries with our tap water. College Station water is very high in salts, very high in salinity. And blueberries are very, very sensitive to that. So again, if you're struggling, you think everything else is right, but something is just not right with your blueberry, maybe have the water tested. You can go to that same website, soiltesting.tamu.edu. You can download the form, collect your water sample, send it off. Again, you can get the results. If you don't understand them, get a hold of one of us. We're here to work for you. We're here to help you understand these things. So water quality is very important for blueberries. You see there on the bottom, moderately tolerant of salty water, jujube, olive, and pomegranate. So there's you have a high salt situation. There's some of your options. Okay, blackberries. I love blackberries. I'm getting more and more into blackberries. I've got some projects going on with blackberries. When people want to grow perennial fruits at home, and they don't have much experience, this is where I tell them to start. Start with blackberries. We've got wonderful varieties these days. They're fairly low maintenance, although they do have some challenges, but they're widely adapted to different soil types, different soil pH. They tend to escape some of the late spring frost, so they're a little bit later blooming in the spring to avoid that problem. A lot of the varieties we grow now come from the University of Arkansas, and so blackberries of those type made it through our February freeze this year without a problem. In fact, this is a picture from May of this year. Blackberries in Central Texas just doing wonderfully after the freeze. You can have an extended harvest period too if you space out and choose the correct varieties. They can have a few issues. The main one probably is stink bugs again, or leaf-footed bugs. They're just hard to control because they fly and they're so mobile. It's difficult to control them. So I'll talk briefly about how to deal with that. Birds, varmints, of course. Anthracnose and white druplet, again, if you're growing some of these more recently developed varieties or cultivars, a lot of these have built-in resistance to problems like anthracnose, white druplet. So we can avoid some of those problems altogether. Texas A&M developed some blackberry varieties back in the day. Bryson, Rossboro, Brazos. Rossboro is probably the best for Northeast Texas, although it's a thorny variety. Brazos berries I have here, maybe they're best used just to lure the birds and bugs away. They're highly productive, make tons of berries. They just, in my experience, my opinion, they just don't have the flavor. For example, somebody brought in a big bucket full 10 pounds of Brazos berries to my extension office one day and said, give them away for free. You guys take home as much as you want. At the end of the day, that bucket was still full. Nobody took any home. They just weren't all that flavorful. They just weren't all that enjoyable. Natchez is one. Again, this is one that comes from Arkansas. It's a Texas superstar. I believe it is a thornless variety, so it has some built-in resistance as well to these disease problems. So Natchez is one to look at. And to have some water. These are the other ones that I'd recommend. If you really want to start growing some blackberries, right here is your list. There's others out there, but these are the ones I have experience with, and these have been really productive. Ouachita, Osage, those are both thornless varieties. They're floricane producers. I'll talk to you about that. Ouachita is just very reliable, consistent. It's a vigorous plant, fairly large berries. Osage is a little bit less vigorous, a little bit smaller berry, but still about the size you would buy in the store, but very sweet, a good flavor profile in Osage. A lot of the consumers really like Osage. Kiowa is a bit of an older variety. It is a thorny variety, but it is a heavy producer with very large berries, some of the biggest blackberries I've ever seen. So what do you want? Heavy production and large berries? Well, you got to deal with some thorns. The bottom two, look for these, ask for these at nurseries. If nurseries don't have them, ask them to go out and get them. Caddo and Ponca, two of the newest releases and arguably maybe the best blackberries on the market today, especially for the southeastern US. The story is for years, we've been developing conventional breeding blackberries for thornless, for disease resistance, for larger berries, for heavy production. And over that time and that breeding, we've lost a little bit of the flavor. And so Dr. Clark at University of Arkansas, since we have all of these thornless, disease-resistant, large, productive berries, he said, well, now let's start breeding some of the flavor back into these cultivars. And this is what he's come up with, Caddo and Ponca. I've tasted some Ponca this year, and without a doubt, it is the sweetest blackberry I have ever eaten. I mean, just wonderful, thornless variety, not a huge berry, but a good producer, a long production season. So look for Caddo and Ponca. Again, wonderful disease resistance with these new varieties. So there's Ponca on the right there. So that's my hand. So a decent sized berry, really. Wonderful fruit, wonderful flavor. Here's to give you an idea of a trellising system for blackberries, just simple 3-wire system separated by about 14 inches between the wires. This is a single plant, multiple stems, and you just kind of train it up like you see here. This is a picture of a root rot problem in the grower's field, but it's a little bit easier to see the 3-wire trellis system and how he's got the canes tied to the wires, just loosely tied to the wires. There's other trellising systems out there like this one with the T and the double wires. I don't really see the advantage. The grower hasn't seen the advantage of it. It's more material, more work. The simple 3-wire system seems to work just fine. I mentioned that those other varieties were floricane bearing varieties. So here's the opposite of that, or the other option is a primocane bearing variety. So primocane varieties can bear a fruit crop on last year's stems, last year's growth from about May to June. And then they can also bear a second crop on the primocane. So the new growth that comes out this year, about July or August, that new growth can also flower, on primocane bearing varieties. It tends to be maybe not as flavorful, the primocane crop, since it comes in right in the heat of summer, July and August. But again, you can extend your harvest season, and a lot of times folks don't care if it's lacking a little bit of flavor, because you've got fresh blackberries in July and August right in your backyard. There's a couple of varieties I'd recommend: Primark Freedom, Primark Traveler. Both are thornless. Both are extremely heavy producers, good taste and flavor, and early to start production as well. Here's an example of Primark Traveler. I believe this is the middle of May. Of course, this is the southern side of the state where I'm at, but just look at the production there. Good sized berries, wonderful plants with little inputs needed. Stink bugs, as I said, can be a problem. You can work on exclusion, putting nets over them. You could, if you keep the weeds cleaned up around the property, that's going to help reduce the amount of stink bugs. You can plant a trap crop, and you can do an internet search for these terms and figure out what they mean. You can use those yellow sticky traps to trap them, bring in beneficial insects. Spinosad is an organic pesticide that can work, especially on the younger stink bugs, and so that can work. Soap, not all that great. Again, better on the younger ones. And of course, we have our more traditional insecticides that can be used to control stink bugs. Here's my blackberry variety trial. I've been running this 2 years now. Look here at Kiowa, 132 pounds we harvested. So we harvest 7 plants of each variety, and this is our total production from 2021. Realize that Osage and Ouachita here are 3 years in the ground. Caddo and Ponca being new, they were just 1 year in the ground. So again, first year after planting, and we've got, look, 50 and 70 pounds of production, about 8 to 10, 11 pounds of fruit per plant over that time span for a newly planted tree. Look here at Primark Traveler. First year or second year in the ground, 15 pounds per plant. I mean, just a wonderful, rewarding plant to grow with not a lot of problems. And props to our cooperator in Alvin Froberg's farm. He's a wonderful grower. So thank you to him for allowing us to harvest 474 pounds of fruit from his production area, all for the sake of research. There's kind of the production of those blackberries over time. You can see Primark Traveler came in early. Kiowa came in a bit later, but a nice long production season for Kiowa. Okay, I'm running out of time here, so we're going to get through the rest of these. Pears, I think pears are underappreciated. A nice low to medium input fruit. The major problem is fire blight. They can be caught by a spring frost, and they take a little time to get into production. You do often need a pollinizer variety, but they can be a rewarding experience. We tend to recommend the more European and Asian hybrids, or an Asian type variety. Those tend to be more tolerant of fire blight disease. Garber is one here in College Station that you see on the left there. Garber is one that's done very well. LeConte has done very well. I had a Garber pear the other day off the tree, and wonderful eating experience. Best pear I've ever had outside of a store. This is fire blight here on the right. I'll let you guys go through these recommendations here later on. I don't have to belabor these points, but fire blight could be an issue. The biggest thing is don't push them with a lot of fertilizer. In fact, my pear trees at home, I really don't fertilize, maybe once lightly in the spring, but when we fertilize them a lot, they get vigorous. That's when we develop fire blight problems. And pears really don't need a lot of fertility to be productive. The problem with pears is they tend to want to grow straight up, and they don't get to set fruit until those branches start to fold out wider and have a wider angle and have sunlight exposed to that branch. And so you can overcome that problem, get them into production earlier by doing this, some type of training where you're either placing weights on the branches to pull them down, or you're maybe placing a wedge between the branch and the trunk to hold it at a wider angle. This should be done about midsummer and left on at least until about midwinter, and then that branch should stay in that place. Figs, let's talk figs. We were talking before the program here that the major limitation for you folks up north is cold, is freezing temperatures. Nematodes can be a problem in sandy soils. Birds, of course. Fig rust is, I mean, just about every fig deals with rust. It's a foliar disease. The leaves often fall off later in the summer. There's no labeled products that you can use to control it. And really, it doesn't seem to threaten the life of the tree or affect the productivity very much. So not a big issue. No pollinizer needed. But they are rather shallow rooted. So again, mulch heavily and keep that soil moisture in a nice moderate zone. Alma is a Texas A&M variety. It's probably a little bit too sensitive for you folks that are in the northern part of East Texas, but a wonderful variety. This is mine at home. You can see the fruit is not all that pretty. I don't know what's going on with the fruit, but the inside, I eat the whole thing except the stem, and there's no problem with flavor. So again, don't let the appearance get to you. We need to adjust our perception sometimes. This is a beautiful, wonderful fruit. Celeste is probably what I'd recommend for most of you in that northern region. It tends to be the most cold hardy. In fact, there's Celeste trees in central Texas that did not have any freeze damage after our February 2021 freeze. So I'd look into Celeste. Here's some other varieties that we'd recommend that we have experience with in Texas. Again, there's hundreds of varieties of figs. I see people trying them all over, and a lot of them can be good and they have been productive for folks. But these are the ones that we know do well. So that's what we're recommending. High input trees. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of, again, we could spend all day talking about plums and peaches. There's just so much to know. Even our next speaker, I don't know if he's on here yet, but Dr. Nesbitt, a very accomplished horticulturist, has peach trees, I don't know, maybe 60 trees in the ground for maybe 6 years now. And he too has had one successful harvest. Now, he and I share the same problem where we're just extremely busy with work and school. And so we don't often provide the perfect care. But it just goes to show that plums and peaches are a little more challenging. They can be grown, certainly. Major limitations: spring frost, erratic production due to not enough chill hours. We have warm winter experiences. And then plum curculio is the one that ruins a lot of people's day. You got the fruit set and then you go out and they all fall off and they've got worms in them. And it's just very hard to control plum curculio. There's some recommendations on plum varieties. We talked about chilling. Peaches are labor intensive with pruning and thinning, weed management and spraying for insects, controlling insects. Again, we've got fact sheets on all of these fruits that can go into the details of how to control the different pests and how to provide the best management, the fertilization that these trees need. The biggest mistake I see is a lack of thinning. We don't want to take any fruit off the tree. We want to keep them all on there. But if we don't thin the stone fruit and peaches, we're going to end up with small sized fruit that's not going to develop to the big juicy peach or plum that we're looking for. So thinning them to at least 1 every 8 inches will help you with that. It's a resource allocation problem. The plant just doesn't have enough water and nutrients to fill out all those hundreds of fruit. So thin them out and you'll have a better fruiting experience. Plum curculio, again, this is going to be recorded and I'll let you folks go through and read all of the recommendations here. You can do some research as well. I've got some cultural methods to help control them, some mechanical methods to control them. And then of course there are chemical methods, some that are organic, so pyrethrins, the kale and clay. Perhaps even there's some new research going on with entomopathogenic nematodes. Some good research going on in Georgia, looking at the, and of course I misspelled promise there on the bottom, but that new area of research does show some promise for helping to control plum curculio without such heavy reliance on our typical pyrethroid insecticides. Texas A&M has developed some very nice new peach nectarine varieties, even white peaches. Again, our Aggie Horticulture website has listings of all of these. Give some of these a try, request them at your nursery so that they know people want them and are looking for them. Wonderful white, low acid peaches that are developed here at Texas A&M. Apples, yeah, we struggle to grow apples in Texas for a lot of reasons. A lack of chilling. You know, the best apple varieties need over 1,000 hours of chilling, and they're just better growing in the northern regions. But you can grow some of these like Fuji, Gala, Molly's Delicious, Pink Lady. They do have problems. They like to flower early and they can get caught by a frost. Fire blight also on apples is a problem. Cotton root rot, powdery mildew. They do need pollinizers. Rain and humidity of East Texas really makes apples a challenge. If you really want apples and you've struggled with apples in the past, look into jujubes. I think that's maybe a good Texas substitute for apples, but you can grow them. I've seen people be successful with apples, but you've got to have a good understanding of those principles and select your methods of management carefully. So you've got to have an intimate understanding of what you're dealing with. So that's apples. As we wrap up here, it's already 10. This is very important. Good planting is a must. This is the mistake I see most common, is that folks bury their plants too deeply. When you plant a tree, my recommendation is that top of the root ball or the bottom of the trunk needs to be at least 1 inch or 2 above your native landscape grade, because there's going to be some settling that goes on, and we don't want it sitting in a low spot. It just causes so many problems. So good planting techniques are a must. Dr. Nesbitt's simplified law of horticultural success: you must water enough, but not too much. And really, I see people trying to use these moisture meters, and I just don't think that they're reliable enough. I really think you're better off gaining experience, getting your hand in the soil, understanding what feels dry, what feels wet. You're going to have better success this way. Once a tree is newly planted, we recommend about a gallon to 2 gallons per inch of trunk caliper per day. So there was some research done where they found out it's not the volume of water you supplied, it's the frequency of water you supplied that really impacts good establishment of your fruit trees. Real quickly here, understand that to really have the tree thrive, you've got to control the competition, and not a small area around the trunk, a 6x6, 7x7 weed-free area all around that tree. There's tons and tons of research that says this is absolutely true. You're going to have better growth, better production if you control the weeds. Takes 80 gallons of water to grow 1 pound of weeds. One of our specialists did that for his PhD and found this fact right here. So just realize they're stealing the water. And if you can control the weeds and apply mulch, you're going to be a lot better off. Again, lots of research that supports mulch use. Here's just my fig tree at home, my Alma fig. Look at these peach trees. This is my last kind of point here. As a horticulturist, I sometimes think that I'm smarter and I can do as I not do as I say. And I didn't mulch this year, thought I could keep up with irrigation and my sandy soil. It's just not possible. Get some mulch on these trees and you're going to be a lot better off. It's going to moderate that soil moisture for you and provide a bunch of other benefits. You can read through this later. Other fruits of promise, look into golden kiwi again, and Nacogdoches. They're doing some interesting things with golden kiwi. That's basically what I have. If you folks need help, again, look at our Aggie Horticulture website. There's fact sheets on all of these fruits we've talked about that gives you the details. If you're going to do some internet searching, I like to include these terms So search Apple's TANU or Jujubee's extension. That's going to give you reliable results from a reputable resource like a university or extension system. So that's it